here we go with a big, crazy, controversial, divisive, hot story out of Mexico right now. Headline: did La Barbie, the drug trafficker, finance an election campaign of the current Mexican president, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador? This is a big story exploding in Mexico right now, and so I'm going to try and unpack this complicated, twisting, crazy story, analyze it, really what's there, and then look at what the implications are. Now, when you have a Mexican president accused of his campaign receiving narco financing, that's going to be controversial. So you have people who are fervent supporters of the president, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, known as AMLO. Big AMLO supporters, like what he stands for, like what he does, and are generally very skeptical of this and see this as an attack on him. And you have other fervent critics of AMLO who see his presidency as being terrible and have sown more violence and crime and other things, and they tend to be very supportive and say this vindicates their point of view. Now, I'm going to try in this video to be down the line. I'm an independent journalist. I'm not either a big pro-AMLO figure or an anti-AMLO figure. I want to assess the facts here and what it means. But I think even the pro-AMLO sympathizers should agree that we have to discuss this story. This is now out there in the public realm with implications, so we have to make sense of it. And the big AMLO critics should also perhaps agree that we have to also look at what are really the facts here and are there shortcomings in these accusations. So I'm going to break this video down into three parts. First, looking at the story and the accusations. Then I'm going to look in part two a bit deeper at the DEA investigation into the accusations and a bit of the backstory behind this and how it came out. And then part three about really what this means and what the implications will be for this going forward. So, looking now then at the story itself. So, the story was broken on January 30th, 2024, last night, around 8 p.m. And it was broken in three media outlets at the same time. ProPublica, a respected American investigative journalist outlet with very high caliber journalists come from it, and the writer was Tim Golden, a Pulitzer Prize winner, a former bureau chief in Mexico for the New York Times. So the most of the focus has been on him because he's very high caliber. But also came out in Deutsche Welle, the German publication, by the Mexican journalist Anabel Hernandez, maybe the best-selling non-fiction writer from Mexico, but currently living outside of the country. She had faced threats here. And the respected journalist outlet and think tank Insight Crime. So the fact that all three came out with this at the same time points to the fact that there was a source or a group of sources who gave this additional information to these sources, to the media outlets around the same time, and said, okay, you can all publish it. You agree to do this. That source who gave the story is not named, but indications are that it could be a retired agent from the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, because they were the ones who had this information. Active agents don't tend to leak such big stuff. retired agents often do, and this is talking about older stuff. So a retired agent could well be the source, but that is not said explicitly. So what are these accusations? So let's look at who the players are here. Now this story very quickly gets complicated, like some kind of spy novel with all these players, so I'll try and keep it as simple as I can. So first big player we have to look at is the Mexican president Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, AMLO. AMLO calls himself a left-wing president. He's kind of a nationalist agenda as well, of defending Mexican sovereignty, and a populist discourse of saying it's the poor people, the people of Mexico against the system and the mafia of power. That's kind of his discourse. He ran for president 3 times. In 2006, where he lost by the closest margin in Mexican history of 0.6% of the vote to Felipe Calderón, a more conservative politician, who then took power and who launched a military crackdown against drug cartels. And now we've seen that cycle of violence carry on since then. Now, AMLO actually claimed that he was robbed of that election by fraud, and he protested in Mexico City afterwards. He then ran in 2012, lost the election to a wider margin to Enrique Peña Nieto of the old PRI party, and ran in 2018, where he won the election comfortably and became president of Mexico then, and has been president since. Now this is his last year in power, and that timing is important for this story. He cannot run for re-election because of the constitution bans that, but his party's candidate, Claudia Sheinbaum, is very ahead in the polls, and he is looking in this last year at securing his legacy, and he still has a popular amount of support, although also fierce critics. So the accusation is that AMLO, back in 2006, his campaign got $2 million in money from the drug trafficker La Barbie. Who is La Barbie then? La Barbie is a drug trafficker who is from Texas, born in Laredo, Texas, where he was born and grew up. Bit of a jock, high school football player, blonde-haired guy, and so his look has attracted a lot of his, the media interest in him. The fact that he was American-born, but he went to Mexico and became a big player in drug trafficking in the 2000s. Big in cocaine, and a very violent player. And he was with a crew known as the Beltran-Leivas, the Beltran-Leiva brothers, particularly the head of them, Arturo Beltran-Leiva, who are from Sinaloan mountains. By the time the story takes place in 2006, they were part of a broader federation of drug traffickers known as the Federation, or the Sinaloan Federation, including El Chapo, including El Mayo. Now later on, there was a breakup among various players here. There was a breakup between Beltran-Leivas and El Chapo. There was a breakup between La Barbie and Beltran-Leiva. But at the time the story mainly takes place, it's 2006, they were together as one group, one alliance. So the accusations are that in 2006 campaign there were meetings between envoys of La Barbie and people connected to the AMLO campaign, including a politician from Durango, Francisco Pancho Leon. And there was agreements, we're going to give money to this campaign, and if AMLO wins the election, then we're going to have say over who's the federal prosecutor, say over officials, and they're going to favour our drug trafficking operations. So according to these accusations, $2 million was paid, and some of the money was bagged by a confidant of AMLO called Nicolas Muyendo Bastar. He'd been a former driver of AMLO, known as El Nico who there's a controversy that he was as a driver was given loads of money. He was a close guy to him. So he allegedly bagged the money. He denies this, as AMLO denies this completely. Now, it is also said, an important point to make clear is that in the accusations, they don't have any evidence of AMLO himself knowing about this money going to his campaign. So the election happened, and AMLO lost it by the closest margin in Mexico history, as I said earlier, of 0.6% of the vote, according to the official count, and led protests. According to this story, La Barbie was pissed that AMLO had lost it and even financed those protests. Well, then we get into the DEA investigations. So these accusations look at events that happened in 2006. But the DEA investigation doesn't kick off in this until 2008. And that happens when a figure walks into the US Embassy in Mexico City, Roberto Lopez Najera. Now he's this kind of dubious figure who is a lawyer, but who was working with La Barbie as a kind of operative, bagman, advisor, around La Barbie's entourage, and apparently Barbie had a big entourage. Now he'd been close to La Barbie, but had apparently fallen out with him and feared for his life. His brother had disappeared at the hands of La Barbie. And so he went to these US embassies, asked to talk to the DEA, the agents talked to him, and he said, I got information, drug traffickers bribed the AMLO campaign. And he says he was part of this. He was part of moving money, handing around this stuff. He also had other information. He also had information about somebody infiltrated from the drug cartel inside the US Embassy, a member of the US Marshal Service. Apparently that information proved to be good. They lured that guy to the United States, where he was arrested. So he was proven at least as having some solid information. And he became an informant known as Jennifer for several years for the DEA. Now the DEA then went further and would eventually also recruit a second source, Mauricio Soto Caballero, who was somebody inside the AMLO campaign, close to the AMLO campaign. And they also say that they got taped conversations from these sources, or from one of these sources, taped conversations about this bribery being made. However, the prosecutors and the agents didn't think that this was enough and carried on, wanted to push this further. At one point, they discussed even setting up a sting operation on the AMLO camp and having someone go there, pretend to be a drug trafficker and entrapping them on phone or on recordings. That was turned down. But they carried on gathering more information and then looked at a potential prosecution of this case in the 2010-11 period. Now, this prosecution then fell through for various reasons. Political cases are very difficult and you need a higher threshold of evidence, and they perhaps didn't have enough there. Also, you had this another crazy case, which people will know about, Fast and Furious, where the ATF agency was following guns being trafficked to Mexico and let more than 2,000 guns be trafficked, and that really blew up. So, then to have another, case with wiretaps then would be complicated. So these are some of the reasons given as why this was not taken to fruition. But it must be very clear this was not a criminal case. There was never actually an indictment made. So what are the implications of this? So firstly, to try and understand all of this, there is massive corruption in Mexico, we know. So this is making an echo because people can believe that millions of dollars were given to a Mexican political campaign. However, there's also corruption on all the other sides as well. I'm not saying that for whataboutism, but I think it's important to the case itself. Felipe Calderon, who beat AMLO in 2006, named as his security minister Genaro Garcia Luna. Genaro Garcia Luna, we know, was a big, square-jawed, cop-type guy. Really was a face for this campaign against cartels, but was eventually himself accused and convicted of drug trafficking last year in a US court. So, and he was accused of working with the same Beltran Leyva people and Sinaloa cartel people. So, it's possible then, did they support both sides? If they had supported AMLO in 2006, him losing didn't affect their business, they could support the other guy anyway. But anyway, there's not a criminal case coming from this, and it seems unlikely at this stage the US prosecutors will revive some 2006 case here. They're not looking at that. So it's not really the implications that based on this, there's going to be a prosecution of the current Mexican president. It's more kind of bring up these accusations and a political impact. Now, AMLO himself is not running for president, but his candidate is. So will this affect her, Claudia Sheinbaum, the candidate for his party, in the race? It may do. My sense is it won't hurt her enough for the opposition to gain, but we'll see. I think the biggest impact, though, is going to be on the legacy of AMLO. And I think he is very keen on seeing himself as this historical figure. He calls his presidency the fourth transformation of Mexico. And this will impact his legacy. And from that point of view, I think he's going to be very wounded by this. This will kind of be a stain there. And that will be why he very fervently goes against this. And his critics look at this.